time felt how iniquitous were the marriage laws of England, but he would buy Milton's prose works and read his pamphlet on divorce. He might perhaps be able to get them at Newmarket. So the bride sat crying in one corner of the carriage, and the bridegroom sulked in the other, and he feared her as only a bridegroom can fear. Presently, however, a feeble voice was heard from the bride's corner, saying, "Dearest Theobald, forgive me. I have been very, very wrong. Please do not be angry with me. I will order the—" But the word dinner was checked by rising sobs. When Theobald heard these words, a load began to be lifted from his heart, but he only looked toward her, and that not too pleasantly. "Please tell me," continued the voice, "what you think you would like, and I will tell the landlady when we get to Newmar—" But another burst of sobs checked the completion of the word. The load on Theobald's heart grew lighter and lighter. Was it possible that she might not be going to henpeck him after all? Besides, had she not diverted his attention from herself to his approaching dinner? He swallowed down more of his apprehensions and said, but still gloomily, "I think we might have a roast fowl with bread sauce, new potatoes and green peas, and then we will see if they could let us have a cherry tart and some cream." After a few minutes more he drew her towards him, kissed away her tears, and assured her that he knew she would be a good wife to him. "Dearest Theobald," she exclaimed in answer, "you are an angel." Theobald believed her, and in 10 minutes more the happy couple alighted at the inn at Newmarket. Bravely did Christina go through her arduous task. Eagerly did she beseech the landlady, in secret, not to keep her Theobald waiting longer than was absolutely necessary. "If you have any soup ready, you know, Mrs. Barber, it might save 10 minutes, for we might have it while the fowl was browning." See how necessity had nerved her! But in truth she had a splitting headache, and would have given anything to have been alone. The dinner was a success. A pint of sherry had warmed Theobald's heart, and he began to hope that, after all, matters might still go well with him. He had conquered in the first battle, and this gives great prestige. How easy it had been, too! Why had he never treated his sisters in this way? He would do so next time he saw them. He might in time be able to stand up to his brother John, or even his father. Thus do we build castles in air when flushed with wine and conquest. The end of the honeymoon saw Mrs. Theobald the most devotedly obsequious wife in all England. According to the old saying, Theobald had killed the cat at the beginning. It had been a very little cat, a mere kitten in fact, or he might have been afraid to face it. But such as it had been, he had challenged it to mortal combat, and had held up its dripping head defiantly before his wife's face. The rest had been easy. Strange that one whom I have described hitherto as so timid and easily put upon should prove such a Tartar all of a sudden on the day of his marriage. Perhaps I have passed over his years of courtship too rapidly. During these he had become a tutor of his college, and had at last been junior dean. I never yet knew a man whose sense of his own importance did not become adequately developed after he had held a resident fellowship for 5 or 6 years. True, immediately on arriving within a 10-mile radius of his father's house, an enchantment fell upon him, so that his knees waxed weak, his greatness departed, and he again felt himself like an overgrown baby under a perpetual cloud. But then he was not often at Elmhurst, and as soon as he left it the spell was taken off again. Once more he became the fellow and tutor of his college, the junior dean, the betrothed of Christina, the idol of the Allaby womankind, from all which it may be gathered that if Christina had been a Barbary hen, and had ruffled her feathers in any show of resistance, Theobald would not have ventured to swagger with her. But she was not a Barbary hen. She was only a common hen, and that too with a rather small share of personal bravery that hens generally have. Chapter 14. Battersby on the Hill was the name of the village of which Theobald was now rector. It contained 400 or 500 inhabitants, scattered over a rather large area, and consisting entirely of farmers and agricultural labourers. The rectory was commodious, and placed on the brow of a hill which gave it a delightful prospect. There was a fair sprinkling of neighbours within visiting range, but with one or two exceptions they were the clergymen and clergymen's families of the surrounding villages. By these the Pontifexes were welcomed as great acquisitions to the neighbourhood. Mr Pontifex, they said, was so clever. He had been senior classic and senior wrangler, a perfect genius in fact, and yet with so much sound practical common sense as well. As son of such a distinguished man as the great Mr Pontifex the publisher, he would come into a large property by and by. Was there not an elder brother? Yes, but there would be so much that Theobald would probably get something very considerable. Of course they would give dinner parties, and Mrs Pontifex, what a charming woman she was! She was certainly not exactly pretty, perhaps, but then she had such a sweet smile, and her manner was so bright and winning. She was so devoted too to her husband, and her husband to her. They really did come up to one's ideas of what lovers used to be in days of old. It was rare to meet with such a pair in these degenerate times. It was quite beautiful, etc., etc. Such were the comments of the neighbours on the new arrivals. As for Theobald's own parishioners, the farmers were civil, and the labourers and their wives obsequious. There was a little dissent, the legacy of a careless predecessor, but as Mrs Theobald said proudly, "I think Theobald may be trusted to deal with that." The church was then an interesting specimen of late Norman, with some early English additions. It was what in these days would be called in a very bad state of repair, but 40 or 50 years ago few churches were in good repair. If there is one feature more characteristic of the present generation than another, it is that it has been a great restorer of churches. Horace preached church restoration in his ode: Delicta majorum emeritus lus, Romain donec templa refeceris, aedesque labentus deorum et, feoda nigro simulacra fumo. Nothing went right with Rome for long together after the Augustan age, but whether it was because she did restore the temples, or because she did not restore them, I know not. They certainly went all wrong after Constantine's time, and yet Rome is still a city of some importance. I may say here that before Theobald had been many years at Battersby, he found scope for useful work in the rebuilding of Battersby Church, which he carried out at considerable cost, towards which he subscribed liberally himself. He was his own architect, and this saved expense. But architecture was not very well understood about the year 1834, when Theobald commenced operations, and the result is not as satisfactory as it would have been if he had waited a few years longer. Every man's work, whether it be literature or music or pictures or architecture or anything else, is always a portrait of himself, and the more he tries to conceal himself, the more clearly will his character appear in spite of him. I may very likely be condemning myself all the time that I am writing this book, for I know that whether I like it or no, I am portraying myself more surely than I am portraying any of the characters whom I set before the reader. I am sorry that it is so, but I cannot help it. After which sop to Nemesis I will say that Battersby Church in its amended form has always struck me